Welcome everyone to USO Colorado's virtual book club. I'm Gail, programs manager here on the USO Colorado team. And I have to say, I'm super excited to have Claire joining us today for our final meeting of this series to discuss her book and our most recent selection, The Secrets of Saffron Hall. Welcome, Claire. Thank you for joining us all the way from the UK this evening over there.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. This is the first time I've done them. It's a transatlantic Zoom, so this is really exciting for me.
Wonderful. Well, before we dig into the group's questions, I'd love to hear a little bit about you and your background. From what I've read in other interviews online, it sounds quite interesting. So if you tell us a little bit about your education and your career and kind of what inspired you to start writing, we'd love to hear some more about you.
Okay, so yeah, I live in just outside Norwich in Norfolk in the UK. If anybody doesn't know, it's that little sort of blobby bit on the east side of the UK. I was born in Surrey, which is just south of London, and my career for quite a long time was in IT. I did a degree in European medieval history and then a master's in feminism and art history. But I worked in IT, and I have to confess I just sort of fell into that accidentally, but then sort of carried on for a while. Always wanted to be a writer, always really into history. But, you know, a lot of people will know I've got 6 children. I've got to help support them. So sitting down and writing books was sort of quite a long way down my list of things that had to be done. And then I moved up to Norwich here, and I worked as a technical manager for about 5 years at a local jeweller's. And then in 2016, I applied to join something in the UK called the Romantic Novelist Association. They have something called a new writer scheme. And the places are sort of very sought after. It's quite difficult to get in, but I was awarded a place in 2016. And one of the reasons I wanted to be on it was that not only could you go to conferences with the published authors, but you could have a book critiqued once a year, a whole manuscript by a published author. So at that point, I left my manager role and just sat down and started writing. Yeah, so that was 2016. And then it took till 2019 before I actually got my publishing deal. So yeah, so I worked a long time in IT when all I really wanted to be was writing historical novels. So yeah, I finally got here.
That's wonderful. What an interesting background. But I can completely understand the need for, you know, supporting a family and I love that you're able to pursue your dream and, you know, actually make that happen. And now congratulations on getting your book published. That's really exciting.
It's a dream come true.
Definitely. So we found The Secrets of Saffron Hall while looking for a Tudor time period novel because we had a request from one of our readers in the last group. So it sounds like your education kind of drew you in that direction quite a while ago, but could you talk a little bit about what drew you to this time period, and then talk a little bit about your research and how you go about researching a book?
Yes, I love history. I particularly like medieval history and the Tudor era. The first idea, I always have little threads of ideas for books, so nothing tangible, but just little bits that I have in my head. And then before I even really started writing, about 2015, my son, who's now quite a grown-up teenage boy, had to do a history project about the dissolution of the monasteries in the UK. That's when Henry VIII made himself head of the Church of England and sort of had all the monasteries knocked down and took all their wealth for himself. And so I said to my son, one of the things that we do have in Norfolk are a lot of monastic ruins and castle ruins. So I was delighted at this project, and whether he liked it or not, I dragged him off to various monastic ruins, and there's a particular one at a place called Binham Priory, and they still use the nave of the monastery as the village church, but the ruins are very extensive and still pretty well preserved. And we were there on it was Easter Monday. There was nobody even about. It's sort of this tiny village. We were just walking around. And if you don't know, Norfolk is very flat. So there's sort of a wind blowing across the fields, and it was just so ethereal. And I just sort of thought, I want to write a book about this place, or that was sort of the thing that really inspired me to start writing that book. Obviously, it doesn't actually appear as Binham in the book, but that was what sort of gave me the inspiration. And in fact, the village church is the one that I used as sort of the Ambers Village Church there. So, so that was sort of what gave me the initial inspiration. Then there are various other places in Norfolk that I sort of went round and sort of used as parts of the book. There's another place called Castle Rising, where there's a castle at one end of the village, and there's a huge monastic ruin at the other end of the village. So that fitted in very well for me. I am very lucky in that I live quite near Norwich, which I think has almost, I think after London, it's got the most Tudor buildings still intact. It's got more medieval churches than anywhere else in Europe. So I have an awful lot of history of the era that I want to study or want to write about, sort of all around me, which is very lucky for me. I live just down the road from a place called Blickling Hall, where Anne Boleyn was born. So that was, so that's sort of what started it all off. Then I read an article about saffron being grown in East Anglia. It was grown in the Tudor times in a place called Saffron Walden, which is quite well known over here. But they grew it in Norfolk as well, and they still grow it today on the North Norfolk coast. So then I had this idea about the saffron and how valuable it is and how incredibly valuable it was even in Tudor times. So that sort of then led into sort of Eleanor and how she could be making money for Greville. So just little bits of the story all sort of began to just weave together and spin them into the story. I always have my historical story first. I always like to weave in real people and real events, but just in such a way that I can add my fictional characters and nobody's going to read it and say, well, he wasn't there. They're always sort of just backroom people, really. So that, but I do like there to be some real history in there. I do have to do a lot of research. I start researching before I write the book, probably 2 months, going to libraries, going around galleries, going around museums. Obviously not at the moment, we're all in lockdown, but in normal circumstances, that's what I'd be doing. So yeah, just gathering information. Sometimes I'll just come across something, just a little sort of snippet that I think, oh, I could just weave that in, and I might be the only person who knows it's there, who knows it really happened. But yeah, just little bits like that. I just love that. I love history, and so I just love writing about it. So that's what I would do. I spend a good few months researching, and even as I'm writing, there'll be something, and I'll think, oh, let me just check that little detail out. I want it to be spot on. So yeah, it does take quite a lot of my time is just spent doing that.
I don't know about everyone else, but I think we've had some discussions about how detailed and how well written a lot of the descriptions and things like that.
That's lovely to hear, because because I like to read books like that. So I do try very hard to make sure that all the detail is in there, and like I say, that it's all spot on. And I'm lucky over here that I can visit places and check things out, and I've got sort of primary sources and a castle down the road in Norwich and things like that. So yeah, I'm very lucky from that point of view.
Definitely.
Right.
So what's one of the most surprising things you discovered while writing your books?
Gosh, that's a good question. I'll have to think about that. All sorts of things, really. I think certainly about sort of how they lived their lives and things like that. Such a difference between the rich and the poor, and we tend to hear about, if we read about Tudor history, then it is all Henry VIII and his 6 wives, or Elizabeth I. But there's lots of sort of details of how real people lived, which is some of the bits that I like to include in the book. How all the sort of herbal medicines and things. Obviously, I have to do a lot of research that never appears in the books. That that's just sort of background things And yes, I did quite a lot of sort of the medicinal herbal remedies, and also a lot about the monasteries, even though the sort of that I didn't appear a lot in Saffron Hall. A lot about the dissolution of the monasteries and how the land was all sort of sold off, things like that. So yeah, it's surprising how when you start researching, well, you fall down a rabbit hole, to be honest. I didn't have deadlines for the books, it would never get written, because in fact Saffron Hall, because that was my first novel, obviously I had a lot longer to write it. And so it probably took about 2 years, because I sort of pick up a book and think, well, I'll just check this. 3 hours later, I'm sort of still there with my nose in a book. You can't do that once you've got a contract, because there are all sorts of deadlines and you just want to write the flipping thing.
That was a great segue into my next question, which is kind of diving into the publishing journey. And I know you mentioned, having deadlines, but did publishing your first book change your process anyway? Or also, what was it like to go through that process and then now become a best-selling author?
Yeah, the process, how I became published, I was at a writers' conference and I had a face-to-face meeting with an agent, and I'd already sent her the first 3 chapters and she liked it, so asked me to send her the rest. And at that point I was still editing it. I find it really difficult to say, editing it. So I sort of said, well, I'll send it in about October, which I did do, and various other agents. And then in the November, I saw that HarperCollins over here, they have an imprint called Avon, part of HarperCollins, and they were having an open submission period where non-agented authors could just send their books, submit them, and there's not many publishers do that. And obviously HarperCollins are one of the biggest publishers, so I thought, well, I'll just do it. I've got nothing to lose. So yeah, so I sent it off, and then about 2 weeks later I had an email from an editorial assistant saying, I'm reading this and I'm enjoying it. Are there any sort of further updates? I said, well, no, but various agents have got it. And then 2 weeks after that, I just got an email, and I can remember it very clearly because it was the 18th of December, and it was the day that our children break up for school. And I've got small grandchildren who live in the same village as I do, as well as my own teenage lad. So they'd all come, all the grandchildren come around, and I was doing like a Christmas themed end of school tea. And I was sitting in the living room with my husband and my daughters and my son-in-law, and this email just arrived, and I just kind of opened it up, and it just said, we'd like to offer you a contract. And there it was, like the contract just attached to this email, no warning or anything. And of course I had to keep it under my hat whilst wanting to squeal and ring my mum. That was the first thing I did, run and ring my mum. So yeah, so that's how I actually got my contract. And then sort of on the back of that, the agent that I'd met anyway, so that she could do the negotiations. And then what happens is then my agent went through it and gave me edits to do, things that she said could be tightened up. And then my editor at HarperCollins did the same. Those are structural edits, so that's sort of the first thing that you have to do, where they'll say, can you make more of this bit? Can you make this happen earlier? Just little bits which do tighten it up. And I could obviously say, whilst it was still my book, and I could have said, I don't want to do that. And sometimes there are things that I say, you know, I'll reject it, or I'll say, that's not how they did it in those days. I mean, I'm the historian in all this, so as we've discussed previously, everything has to be right. So I did my structural edits, and then about a month later, one has copy edits, and these are all on a schedule, so you've got X amount of weeks to do the copy edits. Just little bits. If you repeat a word in a paragraph, it sort of stops it reading properly. Sometimes there are sentences can be tightened up. Commas in the wrong place. I'm not very good with commas. So I quite often put them in the wrong place, but that's all right because that's what the copy editor is there for. So they just tightens the book up a little bit more, make sure that it's all formatted correctly. And then that goes back, and then you sort of get the proofs, which almost the final sort of read through, and then just after that you get it formatted, so it comes through as a PDF, but it's formatted as if it were a book. So the sort of the typeface is smaller, so it's just like reading a book really. So yes, it's all to schedules. Obviously, you know which day you're going to be published. So that was sort of Saffron Hall. Then I got a contract for 2 more books. And then that's all deadlines. So they'll be published in the summer. The next one's out July the 8th. So I've got to deliver it at the beginning of January. And before that, it has to go to my agent so that she can edit it. So that was sort of November. So you sort of work back, and by the time you sort of agreed what you're going to write, you look and think, oh, I've got 6 months to do this. And then you have to knuckle down and actually do it. So yeah, when you've got a contract, sort of subsequent contract, you have to produce a synopsis and say, well, this is what it's going to be about, and then have a Zoom with your editor and your agent. They might ask for suggestions. That happened in, I'll talk a little bit about it later. But I was going to set it all in Norfolk, some of it in London. So from a commercial point of view, they know what's going to make the book more commercial, and fair enough, they're the ones who've got to sell it. So yeah, so we just have a big sort of brainstorm, and I'll say, shall I do this? Shall I do that? And then, yeah, once it's all agreed, then you've got a date by which you have to have written it. So it's not doing a real job. Whereas when I wrote Saffron Hall, I had sort of as much time as I wanted. I was no longer working in IT, and I could keep tweaking it and going back and moving things around. And then suddenly it's all deadlines. It's a good thing I was a project planner when I was working in IT, so I'm used to being disciplined about things. Otherwise, I just sit and read my books and gaze out the window and not do anything. Just as well we've been locked down as well, because there hasn't been anywhere to go.
Definitely. All right. Well, now that we know a little bit more about Clare, I know from previous discussions, our group has really enjoyed reading The Secrets of Saffron Hall. So would anyone like to share their thoughts or ask any questions about the story now that I know we've all finished reading?
I have a question. So thanks, Claire, for explaining the process to us. It's really interesting. I do, and maybe you can say this, I don't know what your next book is about, or if you plan on writing a sequel to Saffron Hall, but I did have I felt like some questions that weren't answered in the book. And I don't know if you can tell us, because I don't know if you have plans for a second book, and obviously we don't want to spoil that for any of us. But I wanted to know if they like made it to France and started a business. Did Eleanor remarry? I have more questions too, but
well, I'll let you into a bit of a secret, because I sort of had never, as far as I have been concerned, sort of when Eleanor left, she left. That's always where I was going to finish the book. But obviously, once it was published, a lot of people wanted to know what happened. So I can tell you that book 2, now over here it's published in July, but I honestly can't say when it'll come to the States, because you're always sort of behind us. And that's obviously all dealt with at HarperCollins, and I sort of find out ages afterwards. The next book, this is all top, but I'll tell you guys anyway. The next book is called The Queen's Spy, and the historical protagonist is Tom, the little deaf boy. I love Tom. I really love Tom. And although I plan my books meticulously, I'm a real planner. A lot of people just sit down and start writing a book and don't really know where it's going. But I'm not like that, because I've worked in IT and projects. I have to have a plan for everything. I have a plan just for midday when I'm going to have a cup of tea. So I plan my books meticulously. But Tom just appeared from nowhere. He wasn't in my plan. He just almost like popped up one day in front of the fire in the still room. But I love Tom. So Tom is the protagonist in The Queen's Spy. And because of that, you get to find out what happened to Eleanor. So I've tied up loose ends without the book being about her. It ties up the loose ends of what happened. I'm not going to tell you what happened.
we're glad to hear that. And I know that I probably speak for everyone where we mentioned Thomas and what his role in the book was, because like you said, he just kind of appeared out of nowhere, and he didn't seem to really have a role in this book. So I think I can probably speak for everyone that we're really happy to hear that, to know what happens with Tom and, you know, the Eleanor and the rest of the family. So that's great news.
Krista, you asked my question, because I was hoping at the end sort of that there would be research done by, I forgot her name already, but
Amber,
Our-
yeah.
Amber.
Yeah, that she would do some research and find out what happened to them in the past, but that didn't happen. So I was like left kind of wondering.
Yeah, indeed. I think because until it was published, it kind of hadn't occurred to me that people would want to know that. I think I've learned about readers just as much as other people have learned about me, in that it hadn't occurred to me, maybe because I read books differently, and I read very quickly, that I do occasionally read a book where I think this hasn't finished where I wanted to finish. Yeah, but I've obviously, so I have learnt more now, that I probably need to have finished that off, sort of dotted all the I's and crossed the T's, which didn't happen. So I've made sure that you will get your answers in the next book.
I do want to say that if you haven't written anything else about Joan in the next book, you should consider it, because I thought you really developed her as a character, and I thought that there could be a lot more building with Joan, the lady's, name, and I thought she was a really strong character for that time period. And I also look forward to hearing about her. So if you haven't, I'm down for a book 3 about Joan too.
Can't talk about book 3. That's still kind of like waving around here somewhere, because I'm still editing book 2. But yeah, who knows? I don't know what will happen. But I do like writing about strong women, as I think I mentioned right at the beginning. My master's is in feminism and art history. So I like a theme of strong women through my book. So yeah, and that's sort of why I was writing about Ellen. I've been thinking, even before I started the book, just about, I went to visit, I've got 2 children who live in Australia, and I went to Australia to visit them, and we were sort of Googling along, and I thought, how weird would it be if you were just picked up and thumped in one of these houses we're going past and told, well, you've got to live there now, because I can speak the language and they drive on the same side of the road as we do, but I wouldn't know anything else. It would be awful. And then I kind of started thinking, well, that's exactly what happened to young girls in Tudor times. They were married off, and you were just dumped somewhere where you could speak the language, but you knew nobody. So that's kind of how Eleanor's story developed, and I wanted her to grow into a strong woman, and then obviously build her husband up as well, until ultimately it came to it. Yeah, ultimately it was his demise.
I had a question for you on Greville. Like, I was kind of trying to Google the history of that particular execution, of the person who claimed to be married to the Queen. And so I was just, is that how you came to that, by doing your research, and was that historically accurate? But obviously not Greville.
Yes. So Francis Dereham and Thomas Culpeper were both accused of sleeping with Catherine Howard.
So I found their names, right?
Yeah. So Catherine and Francis Dereham were both sort of, I can only say, lodging in the same house. They were both sort of very distantly related, but both related to the Duke of Norfolk. So in those days, you sent you might not know, you would send your children away at about the age of 7 to other people's sort of stately homes, and then they brought your children up, which just seems bizarre to me. I mean, I've still got children in their 20s living at home. Not that that's a good thing, but you know what I mean. But, the thought of your 7-year-old, I mean, they're little more than babies, sending them to live in somebody else's house, and they brought them up for you. So Catherine Howard and Francis Dereham did both live with the Duke of Norfolk's mother in Lambeth, and they certainly had a relationship while they were there in their early teens. Then the Duke of Norfolk married Catherine off, more or less, to Henry VIII. Then Catherine had an affair while she was married to Thomas Culpeper, as a secretary. Francis Dereham went over to Ireland. All of this in the story is what happened. He went to Ireland. He came from Norfolk, which is sort of one of those bits that when I find these things out, I realise how I can tie them in. As I was sort of planning it, I actually said to somebody, I need to find some way of making Greville be in the wrong place at the right time. So I needed to find some sort of historical story So Norfolk worked very well from that point of view. So yeah, Francis Dearham did come back. He was a secretary, Catherine Howard, but obviously he didn't have an under secretary, Greville. But both he and Culpeper, yeah, were executed. I kind of labelled some of Francis Dearham's under secretaries, and his men were also seized at the same time and tortured. So yeah, that's how I'm able to sort of kill people off who weren't really there. But yes, but certainly all of that history is what happened. Yeah.
Thank you.
So there's just so much history at that time. I mean, yeah, Henry VIII, all his wives, everything going on. Elizabeth I, who is the on the throne for the next book. Just so much history that could write 100 books and still have barely sort of scratched the surface.
Anyone else have any questions?
I did really enjoy the love story between Eleanor and Greville, because I felt like in the beginning, you know, she's obviously a late teen, 18, 19, 17, and it would be very scary going into a home. She's just lost her father. She's kind of being outcasted by her family, being sent away from the only home she's known, to live with this much older, to her, man. And I really enjoyed seeing her fall in love with him. Do you think he ever felt the same way about her, or did he just kind of think of her as she's making me money, I made a right marriage choice, you know, in this? How do you think?
No, I definitely, I do believe that he loved her, certainly in the beginning. Yeah, she was just somebody who could run his estate for him because she'd done it for her father, and he was up and down to London. But no, he definitely did love her. Yeah, for sure. In fact, when I started writing it, as I sort of just mentioned, girls were sort of married off at perhaps 13, 14 years old. And I was going to make her that age. And then I thought, well, people reading it today, contemporary times, that would not go down well. So I actually was a little bit older than she probably would have been otherwise. But yeah, for sure, he definitely loved her. In my head, he did. And I wrote the book, so that's what, yeah. Yes, I liked writing him. I liked how gentle he was with her on their wedding night. That's one of my favourite bits for writing the whole book, how he sort of behaved on their wedding night. What a gentleman he was in a time when there were not many men who were gentlemen, for sure.
Well, with that being said, will we hear more about Nora in The Queen's Spy, or any more of her and her husband's story? I think we were all relieved to kind of see them reconcile, because it was really iffy through the majority of the book on, you know, her loss, which, you know, females, we can all understand. And I really started to really enjoy Nora and her husband's story and their reconciliation towards the end, and just, you know, everything with Eleanor and how that was tied in. You did a great job tying it all in. And
it's yeah, I think her story was harder to write because I love the history and found the history sort of flowed more, and hers was just a difficult story. I mean, it was so hard, and getting the tone right, yeah, so that she grew as a person. You know, when you're sort of writing these characters, they have what we call a character arc. So they start in one place, but you want them to grow, so they finish in a better place. So yeah, so she was difficult to write just because it was so sad. But yeah, I hope that when people read it, they're sort of happy where she ended up. She's not the modern day protagonist in The Queen's Spy, though. So she does not reappear, well, not in this book anyway. So I've got so many people in my head to write about.
So you're talking about Amber. Amber doesn't reappear.
No, Amber does not reappear in book 2.
Gotcha. And did you, when you did the parallels between Amber and Eleanor, did you intentionally link it to the saffron being maybe bad luck? Because she names her daughter Saffron, things don't go well. The saffron is what was the downfall maybe of, I guess we'll learn more, but.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I linked it as bad luck. I mean, when I was writing the book, I just called it Saffron. In my head, that was just it. It was it. But as I kind of said earlier, for commercial reasons, obviously, then the publisher wants a book that says what it's going to be about. But no, I mean, the link was really sort of the name, and then Saffron Hall and learning about the saffron, for which her daughter was named, because of Saffron Hall. But I wouldn't say that I sort of consider it as being bad luck. It was, I mean, there were two sort of sad situations.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I like there to be sort of same trajectory for the characters, or some sort of time of the two stories. When you're writing dual timeline, they've got to sort of reflect each other in some way. And obviously there's the babies as well, which sort of, yeah, like the two stories to be sort of reflecting each other.
Thank you.
Okay.
Shannon, I know you mentioned you had a question. Did you get it answered already? Okay, great. Allie, how about you? Do you have anything you'd like to add?
I don't know, I think we covered it all. I mean, it was a lot about like the history and the researching it, and you covered all that, which is phenomenal and sounds, I mean, I wish I could just like pop outside and be like, I'm gonna go to this castle today to do some research. I'm very jealous of that with a cup of tea. But Gail knows that I'm always on board for anything that involves tea and the Tudors and England, pretty much.
You definitely fit in well here.
We should really just pack up and go there someday. Does the next book have like the dual timelines? Like, I like dual timelines. I read a lot of Jill Paul does a lot of dual timelines, so like I'm very familiar with them and we enjoy them a lot. So does the next one have the same kind of feel?
Yeah. So I'm still writing dual timeline. So yeah, so the historical protagonist is Tom, who's now an adult and in Elizabethan London, and he gets involved with a chap called Sir Francis Walsingham, which you guys might not have heard of. He was the Queen's spy master, and there were a lot of plots to kill Queen Elizabeth I by the Catholics in France and Spain, because we were Protestant over here, and they weren't happy about that. So yeah, it's all about the plots against Queen Elizabeth, and he's spying. And then in the present day, it's about a young girl called Mathilde, who is French Lebanese and lives a very sort of peripatetic life. And she is brought to England after receiving a letter about an inheritance, and she ends up with an old house and makes a surprising discovery. That's what I'm going to say.
It's very exciting.
I'm always careful not to give too much away. Sometimes I start chatting away and I'm thinking, oh, hold on, I should be giving spoilers if I'm not careful. That's right, though, I checked on Amazon, that's on the blurb on Amazon in the UK, so I haven't told you anything that if you went to our Amazon you wouldn't be able to read.
I did go to NetGalley and I looked for it and it's not on there because
I don't even have a cover for it yet. It shouldn't be too much longer, because it is up on our Amazon. Yeah, definitely keep checking. But yeah, I've not, and every day I look in my inbox in excitement that my cover might have come through, because that's like the best thing when you get a picture of your cover. But every day I'm disappointed. It can't be very much longer. I've finished writing it and editing it now. So yeah, shouldn't be much longer. Well, July the 8th, it's out over here, but like I say, I think you were about a month or two behind. I think the paperback of Saffron Hall doesn't come out till April in the States. I think there's so many different countries, I get a little bit confused.
Claire, I did have a question about Saffron Hall, and if Eleanor and Amber were related, or if you can answer that for us now, or if that will be addressed. I don't think it'll be addressed in your next book. So
it'll be addressed in my next book. Yeah, in my head they were related because it was called Saffron Hall, but I didn't want to sort of state it categorically in case people didn't want them to be related. But yeah, in my head they were. She was there where Ellen had been, and there is a little bit of a connection in that, which I won't tell you because it's in book 2. But I'm not giving anything away to say that yes, there is a reason why they can be related.
Okay, cool. That's exciting.
It's so difficult not to accidentally say something about book 2 because that's sort of in my head at the moment. You know, I'm just sort of like thinking about that, and I kind of open my mouth and think, no, don't say that, you'll be giving the game away. And because I'm under contract, I'm finishing that book, but I'm also having to plan for book 3. So lots of stuff going on in my head. Sometimes I can't remember which book I'm even thinking about. All good fun.
Janelle or Ellen, do you have anything, or Elvia, that you'd like to add?
No, I love the book. I'm excited to hear about the next one.
Brilliant. Oh, I'm just so happy that you've all enjoyed it. When you write a book and it goes out there, you don't know what's going to happen. Is it going to fly? Is it going to fall? The fact that it was like a USA Today bestseller was just like an absolute bolt out of the blue. I'd never expected that it could do so well. I mean, I loved it, and I've always had a lot of faith in it. But when it's sort of people that you don't know, like not your mum or your best friend or your daughter says that they're enjoying it, it's just the best buzz in the world. It really is. It's so lovely for me to be able to sit here in my little kitchen in Norfolk and see all you guys, like, you know, across the pond saying that you enjoyed it. It's just like fantastic. Really good. So thank you.
What kind of books do you enjoy reading?
Oh, well, yeah, all historical books, nearly all historical. Yes, your timeline. I've just finished a book. Have any of you read a book by Kate Moss? She wrote a book called Labyrinth, which is kind of like that bestseller. And she writes books about France, Carcassonne, sort of medieval times. And she's recently released a second one in a trilogy, The City of Tears, the first one from the Burning Chambers. So I've just finished reading that. I read all sorts of historical books. Obviously, I have to read a lot of sort of textbooks for my research. But when I'm not reading those, then yeah, I mostly read sort of historical books. I'm currently just started All the Light We Cannot See, but I'm like way behind the curve on that. I've got so many books on my Kindle, and then sometimes I'm asked to read other people's books before they're published. So yeah, I finally got to that one. I thought, no, I'm just going to read something that's not Tudor, just sort of for myself. So yeah, that's my current read. But yeah, definitely historical book.
My family, my kids and I have really enjoyed listening to a podcast by a historian there in the UK called Greg Jenner.
Oh,
and
yes.
Yeah, he does both like one for the kids, the homeschool histories, which the kids just love, and then one for the adults called You're Dead to Me. And
Yeah.
they're both just full of history and really fun.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, there is so much history that one can cover. It's almost like you don't know where to begin, sort of thing. And I think, obviously, I know other sort of historical authors, and some will do the war, and yeah, people who sort of go further back and sort of than I write, right back to sort of 12th century and things like that. Yeah, there's just so much out there. It's great. Never be lost for a book.
Wonderful.
That it was a historical mystery book, because for so many historical books, it's either just like strictly historical without a touch of mystery. Whereas they were trying to constantly figure out, like, there's something in this tower. What is it going to be?
Yeah, I enjoyed that. There's a good series of books by a chap called C.J. Sansom. Matthew Shardlake is he's like a sort of detective, a Tudor times detective. So there's invariably several murders that he's sent to sort of investigate, and those are superb books. I mean, because it's like a sort of murder mystery that's set in Tudor times. I mean, what is there not to love? It's just great.
Well,
yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that one, actually, because that's on my list for our third book this year. So don't anybody go out and grab it.
Well, he's written a whole load, but the last one that he wrote is called Tombland, and that's set in Norwich. And that's great because I can just catch the bus and I can go into Norwich and I can see all the Tudor buildings that, you know, that appear in the book. So yeah, that's really my favorite, the sort of most recent one that he wrote. So yep, great, absolutely brilliant stuff.
Oh, that's a great recommendation. I'm glad that we're on the same page with that. So I'm excited.
You can invite me back to chat about that one and I'll come and join in and talk about it.
Absolutely. We'd love to have you back. But with that, if anybody else doesn't have any more questions, I'd like to say thank you to Clare and for all of you for joining us today and chatting about the book, and of course all of our previous sessions, and you know, talking through all those mysteries. And at one point we were trying to decide how many bodies we were going to find in the story. And so that was quite an exciting discussion. So
thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. I've had a great time.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for joining us, and have a good rest of your evening and a great rest of your Wednesday, everybody else here in Colorado, and stay warm, and hopefully we don't get 3 feet of snow like they're predicting this weekend.
I thought we were doing badly with like wind and rain, but I think our snow's done now.
Yes, so stay safe everyone, and enjoy the rest of your week, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.